right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Writer's Block. Writer's Block is a show that we actually launched last year where we gather local journalists to talk about pressing issues. Writer's Block has kind of been on the shelf the last few months, but we thought what a great opportunity to break it out tonight with all this news going on about us coming out of Washington, D.C., and of course, how it relates to us here locally in Seattle. We got an amazing panel lined up for you today. We've got Melissa Hellmann from the Seattle Times. We have Liz Brazile from KUOW. We'll have Justin Carter in the second hour from CapitolHillSeattle.com, Capitol Hill Seattle blog. We have Mike Davis from the South Seattle Emerald, Jessie from Converge Media, and our special guest, Councilmember, King County Councilmember Girmay Zahilay. And so tonight we're talking about a few things here. Let me get all this paperwork together. We're gonna start off with what's coming out of Washington, D.C. And some of the things that we saw there leading up to that. We're going to talk about bias in policing, things like that. We're also going to talk about reunifying the country. That's a topic that people are already discussing and what that entails. We're also going to talk about issues here in Seattle that we see arising, and also some regional issues, things that are coming out of Olympia, places like that. So we're going to jump right into it. And our first, when we bring up here on the screen, I think our first two people that we're discussing the first topic with here, and actually, Nikki, go ahead and put up that first slide. There we go. They said the term storm the Capitol was mentioned 100,000 times in 30 days preceding January 6th, according to Signal Labs, a media insights company. First guest I want to bring in here is, and we'll remove that. There we go. Sorry about that. Is Melissa Hellmann from the Seattle Times. And then after that, we're going to pop in with Jessie. Now, I know Melissa, like most major newspapers, the Seattle Times had a lot of reporting on what occurred there in Washington, D.C. And the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, was this well organized? Was this a well organized effort and easily tracked online?
From my understanding, this was something that pro-Trump supporters were talking about for a couple of months. So from reporting that we've seen from the New York Times, there was a group that popped up on Facebook just the day after the election in November called Stop the Steal. And so this Facebook group garnered over 300,000 followers, and they were basically saying all of the things that Trump was that what we know are baseless claims that Trump has said that the election was stolen and that he won it. And so these people were already planning to protest it and expressing their concerns online for a couple of days. So I know that there were a lot of reporters who had seen this happening in real time. They flagged Facebook about it, and Facebook did respond that they were looking into it. And a couple of days later, the site this Facebook group did close. But in those couple of days' time, it spawned several other Stop the Steal groups that were just spread throughout the internet. There were Reddit threads that were similar to this. There were some leaders who came out of this sort of online movement that was created after the election. So this was something that at least reporters knew about, and if reporters knew about it, I can imagine that federal officials also knew about it for a couple of months. And so there was talk several weeks before the incident that January the 6th was going to be a big event, and people were posting photos of themselves loading their guns into their cars. They were planning carpools because they knew that they wouldn't be able to bring their guns onto planes. So there definitely was evidence that people were discussing going to the Capitol and something happening for a long time beforehand.
Right. And now, Julia, let me bring it in over here. Julia, you're out there in Washington D.C. From here, from Seattle. Actually, well, you're out there in Washington D.C. You work in city government out there in Washington D.C. What was the tone like or the chatter like there in D.C. leading up to this?
Well, I think the chatter here was pretty much the same as everywhere else. I mean, it was everyone had this sense of anticipation that this was going to happen. And I think one thing that's, really important to take notice of, and Omari, you can support me and join the conversation in this. When we lived in East Africa, there was a tool called Radian 6, and it was a social media monitoring tool, and it sources from all of these streams that are on the internet and pulls keywords that you can track and follow. And so when we're talking about the term storm the Capitol being mentioned, 10,000 times, you can quantify all of these terms on social media and you can track them for an indefinite period of time. And so to think that this somehow stunned law enforcement agencies and people were just kind of unsure of what was happening really just doesn't make any sense, because the conversations were being held loud and clear across dozens of social platforms. I mean, hundreds of thousands of accounts. And so there really was no surprise here.
Right. And I'll put up a slide right here. Actually, it said, actually out of the Seattle Times, the day before rioters stormed Congress, an FBI office in Virginia issued an explicit internal warning that extremists were preparing to travel to Washington to commit violence and war, according to an internal document. Now, sticking here with Melissa and with Julia, and actually we'll bring in Councilmember Girmay on this. One of the things that happened here is we saw that President Trump was kicked off of Twitter and I guess basically every social media. So after a review of recent tweets from the real Donald Trump's account and context around them, we've permanently suspended the account due to risk of further incitement of violence. Melissa, going back to you first, what you're reporting over there with the Times, what role has social media played in this?
Right. So a lot of Trump's base has come from social media. He's used Twitter in a way that we have never seen a president use before. This is how he has really galvanized his supporters over the past 4 years. And so what I've seen in response to people who are who follow technology is that they feel like it's been a long time coming, that what he was kicked off of Twitter for was not even the most egregious tweets that he's ever sent. It was really internal pressure from the public that seemed to convince Twitter to finally close his account. And so there's a debate within the technology world of whether or not this was the right move. It's a private corporation. It doesn't have any obligation to ensure that politicians just don't say egregious things. But some people are saying that this isn't a good precedent to follow, and that this may be an issue moving forward. So I don't really know how Twitter is going to handle this, if they're eventually going to come up with a policy so that something similar doesn't happen in the future.
Julia, you're out there, like I said, in DC. What role do you think that social media played on this?
I think it played a tremendous role, if not, the biggest role of all. I mean, to Melissa's point, Trump has galvanized his supporters on social media even before he was an elected official. I mean, he is the marketing guru. We know that about Trump. And I think I'm one of the people that kind of takes the stance that this is setting a very, very odd precedent. Silencing political speech can be extremely dangerous. And while I'm not a Trump supporter, kind of silencing somebody that I do follow their leadership and having one of the two major communications company ban his rhetoric or ban their rhetoric really could be dangerous, right? And so I think we're treading waters here that I think we're not really sure where this could go. So, banning Donald Trump right now indefinitely is not going to stop the hate and bigotry and, all of this radical extreme conversation that we see on the internet, because there's so many other millions of trolls out there. So banning Donald Trump is not taking out the root of the issue.
So you're not even though Twitter, these social media companies are private companies, you're not for President Trump being banned by Twitter and by the other social media platforms.
I'm not for it being banned. I think if they suspended the account because he broke policy, I think that's one thing. But this is not something brand new. I mean, Donald Trump has been saying crazy things on social media since the beginning of time. And so I think when we start, is Twitter a private industry? Yes and no. I mean, it's dominating. And so I think policymakers really need to have a conversation on how these technology companies are monopolizing the game. And so if we're going to have some policies around that, that's one thing. But if that's the only platform, I mean, I think it's kind of like it's open season for everybody. That's free speech.
Right, and we have Councilmember. I thought it was important. We're bringing Councilmember King County Councilmember Girmay Zahilay. You're on mute right now, Councilmember. There you go. So, Councilmember, this is an interesting one to bring you in on this because you are an elected official, and my friend, you have 2 blue checks. Unlike those 10-year-olds you were talking to. The Councilmember said he visited elementary school and he was talking these things, and all they wanted to talk about is, dude, you have a blue check. So you are an elected official, and what responsibility, one, overall, do you think social media played in this? But 2, as an elected official, what personal responsibility do you feel that you have in communicating through your account?
I think the social media companies are very responsible for this. In some ways, I very much agree with Julia. I think the social media companies have become way too powerful, and I support breaking them up and regulating them better. At the same time, when you have clear violations of law, when you're inciting people to violence, I do think that you cross over into a territory where it's not just political speech anymore, where he's actually committing crimes and jeopardizing people's lives. So I support him being kicked off of social media.
Right, and now for what kind of guidance do you have when you're personally communicating through your social media? And actually, we'll bring up a tweet that you put out here in a little bit. But I mean, what's going through your mind when you're communicating, especially the last few months when there's been so many passionate issues?
My goal with social media is to keep the people that I care about informed, to share resources with them, to share my opinion and my perspective with them. I would never, ever use my social media in a way that could harm people. And so I'm not surprised by his conduct because he's been showing us who he is for many years now. But I think it was deeply irresponsible to use his platform in that way.
Right. Okay. So we're going to pop on down here to our next topic. And this was actually came from Naomi, who couldn't join. She was going to join us tonight. A little under the weather. And I'm going to start this one with Mike Davis and talk about the difference that we talk about, this double standard. And I know Mike's probably got a lot to say about this one, by the way. This is America where white insurrection is tolerated and Black protests suppressed. Mike Davis, tell us about it.
I really wish that she could be here because I think that quote is right on the money. Like it was mentioned in the first segment, I mean, everybody knew what was going to happen was about to happen. As a matter of fact, I remember the night before they stormed the Capitol, you had images circulating of Proud Boys who showed up to protest with Blue Lives Matter flags clashing with the police. And then after that clash, you saw images of the Proud Boys burning those Blue Lives Matter flags. So tensions were already high. The police had already used some force in the streets. And yet the next day, when they came to this planned protest, you didn't see any police in riot gear. You didn't see any National Guards ready. As a matter of fact, what you saw was police opening up barricades, allowing protesters in. You saw police literally walking with protesters into the building. We saw police taking selfies with protesters. You've seen protesters leaving after it was all over and just walking right up to news outlets and giving interviews where they're saying their name, the city that they're from, and which crimes they committed. And then they just left without even being arrested. There's definitely a bias in policing in the way that you're policed if you're protesting for Black lives versus if you are a white supremacists come into the Capitol building to try to stop the democratic process. And it's blatant and it's in our face. And I don't understand how anyone couldn't see it after those events took place.
Right. Let me go to Liz Brazile. And so Liz, let me give you some elbow room here. There we go. Liz, about this double standard, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I totally agree. I think, over the summer, in covering the Seattle protests, we saw so many protesters just met with kind of brutality that wasn't really all that discriminate. We saw people hit with flashbang grenades. KUOW interviewed a woman whose doctors told her that she had died 3 times and been resuscitated after she was hit with a flashbang grenade by police. I spoke to people who, this woman had epilepsy and she had seizures while in police custody that went unattended to, and later went unattended to while she was in jail. I spoke to a number of people who were injured because of the use of force that the Seattle Police Department deployed on protesters during demonstrations over the summer in Seattle. And even journalists were impacted by those decisions.
Right. And let me bring in the council member. Can you bring the council member, Nikki? Councilmember Zahilay, we actually saw you out there during some of the protests here in Seattle. So you saw some of these things firsthand. Is there a double standard?
Absolutely. I agree with everything Mike and Liz said. What we saw at the Capitol, there were 2 sides to the story, and both of them gave us all the information we need. There was the way the rioters treated the police and the way the police treated the rioters. The way the police treated the rioters, the proof is in the pudding. We saw them allowing them through the gate. We saw minimal use of force. We didn't see anybody get shot by the police. And the visuals are stark when you see Black Lives Matter out there. Imagine if those people who stormed the Capitol were Black or Muslim or any other group other than white people. They would have been treated way differently. We would have had a lot of bodies out there. And then the other side of the story is, how did the rioters treat the police? And it shows us over and over again, the right wing finds some scapegoat to silence Black voices and to uphold white supremacy. Back when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling, the scapegoat was, don't disrespect the flag. We saw them up there throwing the flag down to the ground and putting up Trump signs. Now, when we were protesting against police violence, the scapegoat was Blue Lives Matter. Clearly, Blue Lives don't matter to them, and we're just a vehicle to silence Black people and uphold white supremacy.
Right. I think, for me, weighing in on this one here is with the double, it's a double standard. And I think for me, one of the things was how people excused everything away. Some of these broader narratives that are out there, it excused them away. That, anytime, and I followed enough protests, that once you illegally enter anything, it's no longer a peaceful protest. And no law enforcement agency in America is going to say that it's still a peaceful protest if you've now broken into private property, let alone assaulting officers and everything else. But it's so interesting how even the day of, while there were still these people inside the Capitol, there was a congressman from Oklahoma who said, well, there was a few people who came to start trouble, but most of these people here are peaceful and they just want their voice heard. but they're inside the Capitol. And we see this kind of making excuses for it. Mike Davis, have you seen something similar?
I have, and I really I don't understand. I mean, they entered the Capitol building. That's a crime. They're in people's offices. They're taking things out of offices. You see somebody walking away carrying a podium. I also have a really, really big issue of having this compared to the Black Lives Matter protests that happened this summer. I mean, these are protests that were in the streets. These are protests that went through people's neighborhoods. This protest went to the Capitol building to intentionally disrupt the certification of the U.S. presidency. They literally went there to stop democracy. This is more than damaging a building. This is stopping democracy. You can't compare the two. It's apples to oranges. This is something that we haven't seen before. And at some point, we have to be able to acknowledge there's a difference between a protest and domestic terrorism. And that's what we just witnessed. So I don't even understand why it's called a protest, a riot, or anything short of what it really was.
Councilmember, I see you nodding your head.
I absolutely couldn't agree more, and at the end of the day, people ignore what was being protested by Black people in the first place. We were out in the streets marching against injustice, wanting to protect one another. It was really an act of love and making sure that we take care of one another. On the other hand, you have what Mike was describing, literally trying to stop democracy. And that's something that's just, it's horrible.
What have you been seeing over there? KUOW, big news source. Have you been seeing where people are trying to excuse this away or make an equivalence of the? I mean, for me, it was interesting. On the morning show, we talked about how we have a group of people, and I'm not one of those people who says that everybody who votes for Trump feels 75 million people feel this way or anything like that. I think it's disingenuous to put a whole group of people in a pot, but definitely a lot of these people here that we find that, one, it went real quick from, like Mike said, back to blue, which we saw out there right before, to F the police all of a sudden. And then people are trying to shy away from the fact that this was an intentional act to stop an act of democracy, to certify the president. It seems like that's kind of left out of a lot of conversations. Are you seeing that at all, Liz?
Yeah, I'll say, first of all, I agree with you. I think that a lot of folks are focused on the violence, as they should be, because it was just egregious, and it needs to be, people need to be held accountable who are responsible for the violence itself. But, to your point, I think that understanding the intent behind the violence is key to really understanding what happened last week. Again, as was mentioned before, this was an attempt to stop democracy, and that, that's extremely dangerous. And, we can talk about, what happened last week, but where my mind is at is, what are we going to do to stop the next attempt? Because, for people who have nefarious intentions, who are watching what unfolded last week, they're going to get ideas about ways to escalate that kind of violence and, undermining of democracy. But as far as, the reckoning that's happening among Republicans right now, is very interesting to see, because, on the one hand, there are people who are, doing what they can to kind of try and excuse what happened last week, and deflect from what happened last week. But then on the other hand, we've also seen Republicans who are kind of, going against the grain of their party right now and actually denouncing what happened, and taking a stand against, we saw Liz Cheney say that she was going to back the impeachment efforts in the House hearings. And so, it'll be interesting to see how many of these, GOP lawmakers and supporters will actually, come around to denouncing what happened and taking a strong stand against it.
Right. And sticking with you, Liz, this was an article that you had written there, KUOW, denied anti-seizure medicine and a knee in the neck. Seattle protesters said they feared death following arrests. And we kind of contrast that with some of the things that we saw as how some of these arrests were made out there, or lack thereof, in Washington, D.C. What's a contrast in comparison?
Yeah, so that story that you just mentioned, I wrote that over the summer as protests were at the height in Seattle against police brutality and racial injustice. And I interviewed a couple, a married couple. The woman who I mentioned before, she has epilepsy, and she ended up having several seizures while in police custody and while in the custody of the King County Jail. She was arrested. Her husband was arrested. And then her husband also told me that during the course of his arrest, the officer who was arresting him placed his knee against his neck, much like the way the officer, Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, had his knee against his neck. And so they conveyed to me that they had, they were very scared during the course of being arrested and being held in police custody and then spending a night in jail. They described so many, different horrific ways of being treated while they were in police custody and in jail custody. Contrast that with what we're seeing. We're seeing people charged. I believe, the FBI officials said earlier today that they've charged 70 cases thus far in the insurrection last week. And that they have 170 suspect profiles open at the moment that they're investigating. But we're also seeing a lot of people released from their custody on their own recognizance. And so it is a pretty stark contrast that we're seeing between how protesters over the summer were held versus, these people, these insurrectionists being let go, pending trials.
Right. I want to go over to Melissa again over here. Melissa, when we talk about that, I don't know if you have any reporting over there from the Times. What we see this is that, they've now started to make some arrests, and, people are being charged on minimal charges. They're being letting go on their own recognizance. The FBI, they had a stern press conference today, basically saying that they're coming for people. But I mean, just the fact so many people just walked right out. There weren't a lot of arrests made, at least at the time. We see the police are arresting now. What information do you have on that?
Right. I think that goes back to what we were talking about before about bias in policing. But today there was a report that came out by the Washington Post that was about an FBI intelligence report that was delivered to a joint terrorism task force, which included the Capitol Police, who led this failed effort to fortify the Capitol. And so this report was sent to the Joint Task Force a day before the insurrection, and it warned them that something bad was going to happen. And it was included threads that where people were talking about the possibility of a war, and just inciting violence. So it was something that the police were aware of beforehand. I've read some reporting that has claimed that part of the reason why there was possibly some confusion, or why the police didn't respond properly to the situation, is because of the confusion with jurisdictions in DC. And this has also brought up the topic of statehood for DC, and people really calling for that and saying that this just shows why DC needs to be made a state. I've also read some reports that say that because of this the federal response to the protests over the summer that looked reflected so poorly on the U.S. government. We saw things like during a photo opportunity that Trump wanted to have, that he basically ordered a lot of protesters to be mistreated, so that he could get this photo op. And so we saw that happen, and you didn't see anything even similar to that when there were hundreds of people who were storming the Capitol. So I've read that the mayor of DC and the Capitol Police were really wanting to avoid having that same backlash that they had over the summer. I don't know if that's true, but I think definitely the Capitol Police, they have some questions to answer.
All right. Well, we got our DC person, Julia Jessie. First of all, it was right there in the nation's capital. First of all, how do DC people who live there in DC feel about the lack of arrests and everything there that day? And secondly, as to what Melissa was talking about, what are some of the reasons that you're hearing, credible or not credible, as to what occurred there on the ground, and also leads into that issue of statehood?
Well, first and foremost, I think the sentiments are shared across the nation, and that people were really, really brokenhearted. I know a lot of the DC natives that I'm, friends with, shared a lot of memories of them, really enjoying the Capitol, and, just other monumental statues and pieces here in the District of Columbia. And so, it would be like, someone taking over the Seattle Space Needle, and how that would kind of like really be disheartening. So I think aside from it being, something personal, I think a lot of people really were affected the same way as people all across the country, and particularly maybe even across the world. And so the second part of your question would be that, do people feel like they were prepared? I think we all kind of were in shock that this happened, and even myself, we were live going, as it was going on, and, covering the story in real time, and, just the unrest and the anxiety kind of in the room, even, as I was at work, a lot of people were, fearful to say, like, what's going to happen next? Because it just seemed like the issue kept escalating. And so we didn't really see an end. When we think about statehood, it's situations like this where we need statehood. And I know a lot of people are fighting for that. This is why we need an elected official. This is why we need a governor. This is why we need somebody that can actually pull the plug, and so that we don't have to, so that we can call in for our own National Guard, right? So that we don't have to kind of follow all these federal policies in order to do what we need to do to protect our own city. So the conversation is back on the table. It's been on the table for a number of years. I'm definitely for statehood, without, we're being taxed with no representation. And so I think we really need a seat at the table for sure.
People who've been to Washington, D.C., you see the license plate there. The tag on the license plate says taxation without representation. Exactly. Excuse me. Thank you, Bobby. So moving on to our next one here, we'll actually throw this back over to Councilmember Zahilay, and we'll put this up on the screen. We talked about this. We hit on this a minute ago, but bring this up here to the council member. And what it says is the way they're treating Capitol Police right now shows us it was never about blue lives. Blue lives only matter to them if advancing white supremacy and helping them maintain power. Council member?
Yeah, blue lives didn't matter to them, just like the flag didn't matter to them when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling. Both of those pieces of imagery were used to help them maintain power and help them suppress Black voices. You saw the way they were treating police in DC. They actually murdered one police officer in a very brutal way. They were chasing police officers through the hallway. And so it shows you that it wasn't about blue lives matter. It's about Black lives don't.
That sounds like a perfect lead in from Mike Davis. Let me bring him in here. Mike?
Everything that he said is right on the money. And I think that the one thing that I would add here is that the FBI has known for an extremely long time now that white supremacist organizations have actually infiltrated our police forces. So what do we expect our police to do when you have white supremacists coming and knocking on the door of the Capitol? There's reports that have already come out of undercover police officers showing their badges, or off-duty officers, I should say, showing their badges and being let right in the Capitol. This is why they're taking selfies. This is why they're walking arm in arm, because this is them. Even here in Seattle, we have reports of our own police officers who were in DC for this protest. So when you have these organizations, these white supremacist organizations that have already infiltrated our police forces, according to the FBI, and nobody's done anything about it, what do you think is going to happen when these people get this upset and they have a president in power who will fan the flames instead of trying to make them die down?
Yeah, I think one thing that was interesting to me is that even inside the Capitol, and people were saying, well, these are patriots. And what we saw there is we saw the Confederate flag there inside of the U.S. Capitol, a flag that had never reached inside the Capitol. It took until January 6, 2020 for the Confederate flag there to fly inside the Capitol. And, you know, we talked about this on the morning update show. And be clear, I mean, that's the flag of traitors. That's the flag. They declared war on the United States of America, and they lost. But that flag right there in the Capitol, I mean, there was so many. It was just layer on top of layer on top of layer of things that we saw there in DC. Mike Davis.
Well, yeah. Oh, and look, I know that you're the one known for giving us history lessons here on Converge, but I mean, I think that even though the Confederates lost, they were never kicked out. They were allowed to stay. And not only were they allowed to stay, the Confederates were allowed to write some of the early history books that we got in our schools. The Confederates had monuments and statues that were built in their images. They named schools after Confederate generals. Like, our society never fully broke away from that specific ideology. It's always been allowed to live within our country. So while you have the FBI and they label everyone else of different colors terrorist organizations, and they're willing to crack down on all of those, it's like we just allow these alt-right folks to just exist within our society. So I would argue that it was only a matter of time before something like this was going to happen.
I see you nodding your head, Councilmember.
What Mike is saying is absolutely right. And our society needs to realize that white supremacy doesn't just hurt Black people. It hurts everyone. And the sooner that we can come together and understand that fact, the faster we can fix this problem.
All right, we're going to take a quick break right now. And there's been a lot of conversation real early on here talking about, man, it's healing, reunifying, and everything else. And we want to give that a deeper look. You're watching Writer's Block.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us.
Back on this rap-ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own, tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media.
Oh, it's all good. Welcome back to Writer's Block. My name is Omari Salisbury. Got our all-star panel here today. We're talking about the Capitol riots and fallout from there. And it's real interesting. We're discussing these comments over the break, and all these comments are welcome. Not threats, though, but all the comments are welcome. And I think that what people will find is that, especially our media colleagues here that are joining us tonight, is that, you know, you get this thing where, man, you guys don't ever call out violence or destruction on this or the left or right, man, you can go back. This is the best thing is we have receipts here at Converge, and we've just consistently called it like we see it. And that's why right now, and that's why we can consistently thrive and be in our lane, because when it was the far left who was over here tearing stuff up, we called them out on Converge. When it was the police throwing flashbangs at people's heads, we call them out on Converge. And now when it's these people here in DC, we call them out on Converge. Who you guys need to be worried about is who's quiet. Who was quiet early, but now they're chattering? Or who was chattering early on and now they're quiet? That's where your issue is, because, you know, we can always just keep it real over here and just call it like we see it. Wrong is wrong, no matter who it is. Right is right. So we wanted to move to this topic here of reunification and healing. And I'll play this video here, and then we'll start off with Councilmember Zahilay, and we'll make our way around the room. This was the other day on the Morning Update show, because we always hear politicians talking about it's a heal, time to bring America together, which is an important thing to do. But a lot of times what we hear is people in a rush to treat the symptoms, but never really having the courage to cure the disease. Politicians are very quick and diligent to treat the symptoms, but very rarely do they have the courage to cure the disease. And so when we're talking about healing, let's be clear that if it's just to put the Band-Aid back on here and let this heal right here, that's not healing. There's a disease that's afoot. And literally for hundreds of years here, we've found a way to kind of treat the symptom here and treat the symptom there, because as politicians and as people, we haven't had the courage to cure the disease. Councilmember Zahilay, now you are a politician and elected official. So I thought that we would start this one here with you. This talk of healing, can we even as a country actually come together and be unified? And what does that look like?
I agree with everything you said in that video, Omari. Whenever there's deep injustice in our country, there's a desire by many, especially mainstream politicians, to sugarcoat the problem and propose things that sound nice, but they don't really fix any problems. You'll hear the sound bites every now and then. You'll see them saying that we need unity, we need to come together and heal, we need decency. Decency is a big one that they say. We need to go back to normalcy, we need to restore the soul of this nation. But really, no, we don't need unity with fascists. We don't need to come together with terrorists. We need to hold people accountable. No, we don't need to prioritize decency when we're talking about terrorism. We need bold change. We don't need to go back to normalcy or restore the soul of the nation. We don't need to go back to anything. We need to forge a path forward toward things that we've never seen before in this country.
Right. And we'll go over to Julia, Jessie. Julia, we hear this talk about healing. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, it's like you said. I mean, when you have an infection, you can't just put a Band-Aid over it. You need to clean it out in order for it to heal properly. And I think, you know, there's a lot of scarring. There's a lot of infection. And I think once we clean this out and we rid our nation of what's, you know, ultimately breaking us and dismantling us and dismantle these institutions and systems to how we got here, then we absolutely should be able to unify and heal. But I know that if we continue to just Band-Aid the issue, no real healing, no real change is ever going to come. And so I'm with Councilmember Girmay in that we need to have some bold leadership. We need to have people who are, you know, not mainstream politicians, who are willing to speak truth to power and who are willing to actually make this happen. So I look forward to, you know, less of this, you know, clickbait and buzz of like, let's impeach the president, and really saying, okay, how did we get here and what can we do to dismantle this system? And so real change is going to take real action. And so, you know, if you watch the clapback culture with me and Mike Davis, we're always calling people out on that. So I'll be around to talk about it.
I'm scared to put you guys on the same screen together tonight.
No, I've been waiting to get on with my guy.
let me bring in Melissa, and then we'll go over to Liz. So Melissa, earlier today, and I don't know if you saw it, but Mayor Durkin, somebody posed a question to the mayor and about healing and coming together. And one thing Mayor Durkin said is that, yeah, there needs to be truth and reconciliation, but there can't be reconciliation without there first being the truth. What kind of reporting are you guys seeing about maybe Seattle area politicians calling for certain things, whether it's peace or whether, I mean, we see some people, we also see Councilmember Sawant, who's got her campaign going there, talking about bring down the right wing. What are some of the things you're seeing?
Yeah, so I know that a lot of politicians in the Seattle area spoke against the insurrection that happened in the Capitol, and I know that a lot of people are also calling for the police officer, Solon, the police guild president, to resign after his comments, and so there's a lot of people wanting people who were responsible for this, or also people who maybe said some controversial things about what happened to be held accountable for it.
Liz, what are you hearing and seeing, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so, we saw Governor Inslee, who we know is not a fan of Trump, never has been, take a stand against what happened and call for his removal from office. And then we also, KUOW did an interview with Republican Rob McKenna, who was the former Washington State Attorney General and candidate for governor. And, he said that Republicans need to take a strong stand against what happened and against extremism that has taken over the party, no matter what the personal cost may be, because I think we're seeing a lot of that side of the aisle kind of, weighing what the cost would be for them to, if they were to take a stand against this stuff. You have a lot of loyalists who are kind of, have their back against the wall right now. And so it'll be interesting to see where everybody falls kind of when, because when Trump leaves office, you got a lot of people who are going to be struggling to move forward with their careers because they're going to have this big, huge scarlet letter, so to speak, that they're going to have to carry, because this doesn't just go away when Trump leaves office. People have a long memory. And, so it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Mike Davis, South Seattle Emerald, man, tell us, we hear this talk about healing.
I think, first of all, I honestly don't agree with impeaching Trump. I think that it would show a sign of weakness for Democrats. They put up with his antics for 4 years. You had plenty of time to impeach him and get him out of office. You never have. And now we're going to wait until a week before he's out to finally take that stand.
They did impeach him. He wasn't convicted.
Okay. Yes, I'll give you that. But I mean, looking at the situation that we have right now, I understand why they would want to. I just don't know if it's worth it to spend the political capital to get him actually removed when we got to start moving forward. I also don't really agree with the idea that people have long memories. When it comes to politics, the American people are usually pretty short-sighted, and you can flip the script and you can be Republican one day, Democrat the next day. I used to argue with people about Elizabeth Warren over that very thing. So what I would say is I think we need to focus on the future, stop all of this reuniting talk, hold the people accountable that need to be held accountable, and start focusing on the future and actually moving forward.
All right, now you bring up the issue of impeachment, and this thing is moving fast there in DC. They wanted Pence to come in. They said if he didn't do something, they were going to go and they were going to impeach him. Pence said that he's not going to do something. It's going to move. But anyway, here's a short clip that we had from Speaker Pelosi, and we'll talk about the issue of impeachment.
Is anybody running the executive branch of the government? Who is running the executive branch?
Well, sadly, the person who's running the executive branch is a deranged, unhinged, dangerous president of the United States. and only a number of days until we can be protected from him. But he has done something so serious that there should be prosecution against him.
All right, so let's bring Councilmember Zahilay in, an elected official here. What are your thoughts on this impeachment? It looks like they're getting ready. They're going to put the articles there, and the House is probably going to, they're going to vote on it.
I think it's really important to impeach him because he can do a lot of damage in the few days that he has left. Remember, this is a man who has all the nuclear codes, and he's unhinged and deranged, just like Nancy Pelosi just said. And yeah, Omari, I agree with you too. They did try to impeach him already last year, and they just couldn't get him convicted and removed because of Republican obstruction. So given that he did incite terrorism against the United States government, given that he did try to interfere with our elections and steal another term for himself, I think these are plenty of reasons to try our best to remove him as soon as possible.
Now, Jessie, you always have some interesting insights here around Trump and his administration. Do you think that he should be impeached?
Yes, he should be impeached, but is it necessary to spend that much time? I mean, we're out of time. And so I think rather than spinning our wheels on something that likely is not going to happen is a waste of time. And so I think we need to, as Mike Davis said, we need to think about something else and move forward. I think, prosecutors all around the country should be figuring out how to prosecute Donald Trump when he steps out of office. So on January 20th, when he's no longer the president, we need to be thinking about where them charges is going to come from. So no, I think it's a wasted effort. It's wasting airtime in the media right now. And when we could be talking about something else.
Liz Brazile, what are some of the readers and listeners over there in KUOW? What are you hearing around this issue of impeachment?
Well, so I wanted to raise the point that, I think there are consequences for, if he is impeached, more so than just symbolically removing him. The American taxpayers would not have to pay a pension for him once he leaves office if he were to be impeached. And so that is one thing to consider around this, because as we know, once presidents leave office, they kind of earn a salary for the rest of their life for their service. But as far as what we're hearing from our audience members, I think we're just hearing a lot of the same outrage over this happening and just, having a reckoning about how do we get to this point to where a sitting president could incite an act of terrorism against his own government by his own people.
Right. And Melissa, let me go over there to you. What have you been following along on this process here?
I have, yeah. I'm interested in this because I think it was Mike who mentioned that this is going to take a lot of political bandwidth in order to impeach him. It was hundreds of days for him to be impeached the first time. So if he is impeached again, it will be unprecedented. But a reason why people are opposing it is because he won't be able to hold public office again if he's impeached. And so people are thinking that this will just like tie his hands so he won't be able to do any more damage in the future. I've also heard talk of not impeaching, of waiting 100 days to impeach him. So waiting until he's out of office. And the reason why is because the Senate needs to approve of Biden's cabinet. So they need to focus on that first, and then after that, they'll go to looking at the impeachment article.
Yeah, people were talking about, they're like, hey man, they impeach him when he's gone, take his bennies, take his man.
I mean, he's been losing a lot. He's been losing a lot. A lot of his honorary, degrees and other things have been being pulled really all over the country. So the question is it going to happen? And my guess is no.
Well, it can definitely happen, but I think I would say we have Joe Biden, who's going to be our president. And Joe Biden is like, I mean, he's so bent on unifying the sides and reaching across the aisle. So if he gets the Republicans to actually come on his side and go through with actually removing Trump from office, what is he going to have to give up in return? I think that's what bothers me. And I understand the idea of Trump not being able to run again in the future, but Trump isn't the only white supremacist in this nation. He's not the only guy that thinks like that. He got 70 million people to vote for him. His ideology is here. It's been here, and it's always going to be here. So I just don't know if it's really worth it to give up the political capital it may take to actually get the Republicans to agree to this. We need to move forward, and we actually need to start to do the real work of healing our country. And I think that that should be the focus instead of worrying about the guy who's going to be out in a week or so anyway.
Right. Let me bring this up. Julia just mentioned, and you talked about people pulling back. These are companies suspending political contributions following the Capitol riots. You got a lot of people: Marriott, Hallmark, Citigroup, Bank of America, Google, Microsoft, Ford. Man, Conoco, Philip, Verizon, AT&T, some of everybody. You know, that's the one thing about big business, man. They break bread with everybody. But they've been pulling back some contributions here. And let me pull up a few more things. You guys stay here on the screen. We got some polls here, some information. So Americans who disapprove, do you approve or disapprove of the actions of Trump supporters who stormed into the Capitol? All Americans, just about 75% disapprove. Looks like Democrats about like at 80-90%. Republicans, do you disapprove? About 55% disapprove. That means that there's 45%, according to this poll, that do. Councilmember Zahilay?
I mean, that's just, it's really disturbing and disheartening to see. It makes me sad.
Yeah. Julia?
Not surprised. Not surprised at all. I mean, you guys, all you got to do is get on social media. The country is completely divided in half. We talk about it on our show every week. I'm not shocked or surprised by this. I mean, when you give a platform to somebody who, as Nancy Pelosi said, deranged, the demigod that is Donald Trump, and you gave him a platform to really fuel this fire that's been being fueled over and over for the last couple of years. This is its birth child. So no, I'm not surprised. I'm not shocked. It's exactly where we are. And I think one thing that I can appreciate about this moment is it has truly exposed where we're at as a nation right now.
And we got another one right here. Did not do enough to condemn. Do you think President Trump did enough to condemn his supporters storming into the Capitol? All Americans, about 53% there. Democrats, about 80% are saying that they do not think he did not do enough to condemn. And Republicans, oh, do you think he did enough? Let me put that back. I'm sorry, guys. It's been a long day. This is my fourth show today. Do you think the president did enough? Did not do enough. This was a bit confusing for me, Nikki. Maybe you can send me a message here. But basically, the gist of it, we want to get the numbers right. I don't want to put up anything, so we're going to pull that down. But one thing that we do know is, just like most polls here, where the majority of Americans are saying one thing, Democrats are like, nah, this guy, he didn't do enough. And of course, the party is base says that, yeah, he did do enough. Mike Davis?
Those numbers were pretty confusing, but I think that I
had to pull him down. I didn't want to put some numbers.
But I mean, no, I don't think it's surprising. I don't think it's surprising that Republicans think that he did enough. I mean, I seen the video where he told the protesters that he loved them. So I don't understand how you can be on that side of this, but this is where we are right now. No, it's not surprising at all.
Yeah. Let me move on to another thing here. Actually, want to bring Liz in. We've got a clip here. This is crazy. I guess when they cleared the Capitol, all these guys, they put them into this safe room, and then you had people there who refused to wear masks. This is from Congressmember Pramila Jayapal. Republicans refused to wear masks and mocked us for doing so, creating a super spreader event on top of a deadly attack. Now I'm among those who have COVID after sheltering with them. They put lives at risk. Find members who refuse to wear a mask and remove them. Find members who refuse to wear a mask and remove them from the floor. Let's go to you first on this, Liz.
Yeah, so I don't understand why we're at the point now in 2021 where people aren't, honoring science and not willing to wear masks. But I think that, when you hold the weight of being a Congress member, of someone who's in that high of an office, conducting that level of responsibility, I think a lot of people probably would support, masks being a requirement out on the floor. I think it's a very small inconvenience, in comparison to the potential harm that could come from people not masking up at this point, where we have seen the deadliest, we're at the deadliest point in the pandemic right now. And so, I would support mask wearing. I still don't understand why it's a politically divisive topic, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah, and we're going to follow up on that. But Melissa, have you seen any additional reporting around this? I think I saw earlier that I was even another member of Congress who's now saying that they've contracted COVID.
Yeah, I know that Pramila Jayapal, she contracted COVID. Like Liz said, this has become a politically divisive issue, which is unfortunate. But I think that a lot of people have seen Trump as a role model in a lot of ways, and it took a long time for him to wear a mask. And he mocked people who wore masks. So I think that we see him as an example of maybe what a lot of his followers also believe. So so it doesn't necessarily surprise me that there were people, Republicans, who were just admonishing them for wearing masks as they were hiding.
Now, the council member is a big mask advocate. Let me play this video here real quick.
I'm not trying to get political here. In fact, I'm just going to leave it alone. I Come over there and help me. Don't do yourself any good. I'm going to. I'm going to.
So, man, that was Vice President-elect Kamala Harris over there trying to hand out masks. You guys are like, nah, I'm good. What are your thoughts, council member?
I feel my blood pressure going up. That video is infuriating to see them dismissing something so simple that could protect the people around them. And him saying, I'm not trying to get political here. The fact that basic science and what the doctors and public health professionals in a pandemic are telling us to do is political. And I think the thing that made me the saddest is one of the tweets that Congresswoman Jayapal sent out. She said they put her in this predicament where she had to make the impossible choice of going outside and being killed by terrorists or staying inside and being killed by the virus. Just an impossible choice, and it all goes back to this just lunacy that Republicans are committing right now. It makes me so mad.
Now, Julia, Jessie, the things that you've shared with our audience on Clapback Culture, but you had COVID, and you've also had quite a few family members die of COVID. What were your thoughts when you saw that?
I have, and unfortunately, I just had my uncle pass away from COVID, and we took him off life support last week. So rest in peace to my uncle. So my family has been really affected by COVID. I see some of the comments, talking about masks inhibit the immune system. My uncle was also a physician. And one thing that I can say about just it's very simple. If you don't want to wear a mask, you should stay home, and you should stay home with the people that you want to be unmasked with. But when you're out in a public setting, to everyone's point on this panel, it's not inconvenient to put your mask on to go in and out of the grocery store. And so if that's not something that you want to follow, then don't do it. But I think we would get over this hurdle much faster should more people follow these very simple restrictions and guidelines. I know that people are exhausted by a lot of this conversation about COVID-19. But just because COVID didn't take me out doesn't mean that it wouldn't take out some of the elders in my family. And so I've had to bury a lot of people to a disease that's very lonely and very traumatizing for families. And so, I'm burying somebody this weekend. And so that's just where we're at. So wear your mask, wash your hands, and listen to the scientists, and just do your part.
All right, good words for you there, Julia, Jessie, and good words for you to end this hour with you. I know that you have to jump, and we've got Justin Carter from CapitolHillSeattle.com coming up. We're getting ready to talk about the local issues here and the fallout around these Capitol riots. Appreciate you, Julia, and we'll see you Thursday at 7 p.m. with Mike Davis for Clapback Culture. We're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, Writer's Block continues.
Did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us.
Back on this rap ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own, tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers, and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media.
All right, welcome back to the Writer's Block. This Capitol Riots edition got a stellar panel joining us in this hour. We're joined by Justin Carter of CapitolHillSeattle.com. This first item here, though, I'm going to throw out to Melissa Hellmann first, and we'll talk about some of the reporting around it. You know, when SPD hit Twitter, Chief Diaz hit Twitter a few nights ago and talked about some officers were there in Washington, D.C., and they're doing further investigation into whether they did something wrong or not. I mean, clearly people have the right to exercise their First Amendment speech. People have the right to go to rallies or whatever it is. And I think that what OPA is investigating, actually, I can put it up here on the screen. This is when I emailed Director Meyerberg of the OPA. He said, OPA opened an intake into the matter today, and we'll be investigating. At this point, we're aware of 2 current SPD employees are believed to have attended the protest in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. We do not know yet the extent of their participation, and we'll be determining this as we proceed through the case, and we'll be identifying any other SPD employees who may have been involved. And so now I'll bring in Melissa, but because one, Chief Diaz had a press conference yesterday. We weren't privy to the conference in real time. I'm sure the Times was, but maybe you can update us as to some of the Times reporting around this issue here and what OPA is looking into?
Yes, unfortunately, I'm not able to talk about this very much since I didn't cover this personally. But as you said, this is something that OPA is looking into, and I understand just in general that I think that this has made us consider our police policies in general, and what needs to be revised.
Right, and Mike Davis. South Seattle Emerald, this was also something that you guys have been covering.
Yeah, I'm having.
Oh, you're muted, Mike. You're muted. Mute. There you go.
My iPhone is going off, man. Can you repeat that, please?
That was you. We were sitting over here, man. Put this thing on mute. Where's the phone at, man?
I'm trying. I'm getting alerts.
You're blowing up. South Seattle Emerald's coverage on this.
I didn't hear anything you said before.
Okay, no problem. We're talking about OPA. How OPA is now investigating what these officers in these. Yeah. Matter of fact, we're gonna let you find that phone. Let me roll over here to Liz Brazile. Go find the iPhone, Mike.
As was said before, the Office of Police Accountability has launched an investigation into at least 2 SPD officers who are known at this point to have attended the rally in DC. What remains an open question is the extent of their involvement in, if they were involved at all, in the attack that happened thereafter. And Interim Police Chief Adrian Diaz has taken a pretty strong stance that there will be zero tolerance for, any violation of SPD policy, and that conduct, of people who stormed the Capitol would absolutely be a violation of SPD policy, and that he would fire them if they had any level of involvement in the violence there that we saw at the Capitol last week. But what he also made clear yesterday is that he will not fire people for simply exercising their First Amendment right to, protest if it turns out, in fact, that these officers were only involved in the rally, the political rally, pro-Trump rally that preceded the violence at the Capitol.
Right, and you find that phone, Mike?
I'm good.
But you good, boy. You blowing up. Everybody, look at my baby. He over there on Converge.
My bad. Oh, but I think Liz said it. Really hit the nail on the head. I just find it really interesting that's the stance that he takes when you had SPD just beating down protesters in Seattle, and now he's speaking like he wants to play in the middle, like he wants to protect their right to peacefully protest, yet they drew an imaginary line on Capitol Hill and didn't let anybody peacefully protest over there.
Well, he does. I mean, the way I feel about it is that because I don't want my right to protest to be abridged by whatever it is that I'm protesting about. I mean, if the officers went to go and hear the president speak, like a lot of people do on either Republican, Democrat, you see somebody speak, I think that's one thing, but clearly going into the Capitol and participating in these events would definitely cross a line. Or you don't think, Mike Davis, that the Seattle police officer has a right to go to a peaceful assembly of their choosing?
I agree with the idea of going to a peaceful assembly of your choosing, but this assembly was not peaceful, first and foremost. And also, I mean, you got to draw the line somewhere. I mean, this is rooted in anti-Blackness. This is rooted in so many things that we should stand for if we want to, quote unquote, be unified. So what message does it send for your officers to be there taking part in this type of protest?
All right, we got another writer in the room now. We've got Justin Carter from Capitol Hill, Seattle. Justin.
Good evening.
Man, what's up, man? How are you?
Doing okay. It's a different hour for you and I, so this will be an interesting conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, no. Well, it depends if either of us have been to the bar. You know, we're usually catching up at the morning update show.
Can't go to the bar right now, Omari. Come on.
So some of your thoughts right here. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, a wait and see thing, but Chief Diaz kind of jumped on top of it. He said that, yeah, if people think it's overkill, but he wanted to come out to the public, make the public aware of things.
Sure. I mean, Chief Diaz made a good show. Made a couple of rookie mistakes. I think that they're still scrambling over his description of potentially several, I think he said, Seattle police officers involved. I don't think he meant that, but they've been, you know, scrambling since to try and clean that up. And yeah, we'll see what comes out of these things. We find most of these investigations are there to kind of to hold up the official decisions and to exonerate and those kinds of things. If some actual wrongdoing is discovered, I'll be really surprised, but I'm glad it's being looked into, especially in light of some of the things that are being said in the social media sphere around here, around some other leaders from the Seattle Police Department and from the union.
Right. And now, and speaking of that, let me see here. We talk about Mike Solon, and it says pressure continues to mount on Mike Solon, the president of the Seattle Police Officers Guild, as 8 of 9 members of the city council called for his resignation Monday morning. And let me see, do we still have the council member here? We don't have the council member, so cool. We'll put everybody back up. I think it popped off. Let me add everybody back in here, and we'll go around. Yeah. This is the tweet. Let me put up this Mike Solon tweet here. He actually retweeted this guy, and they're basically saying that Black Lives Matter were the instigators of this event or this insurrection, this riot, and Black Lives. You know, there's a whole theory out there that this was actually put together by Antifa and put together by Black Lives Matter, and so Mike Davis shaking his head over there. And some of everything else. Let me start off, and you'll let me know how much reporting you guys have on this, or if you're on this one, Melissa, with the tone now on the city. I mean, it's like you had Scott Lindsay, then you had Chief Best, then you had Mayor Durkin, then you had the city council, and everybody's like, Solon resign.
Yeah, everyone is really pressuring him right now to either take back his statements or to resign. And so far as I know, he's just digging his heels in, and he's refusing to do it. And he says that this is part of cancel culture of this pressure to try to make him resign.
Yeah, matter of fact, we'll put this up here. I interpret the calls to tender my resignation as political rhetoric. I will never bend to council culture as I lead this union with conviction, Solon wrote. He added, however, that if at any point you feel this union needs a course correction, I will always be open and receptive to your feedback. It was Mike Solon, president of SPOG, earlier today. Liz, tell us what's been some of your reporting or what you've been following here around this issue with Mike Solon.
I think Mike Solon, he is a very controversial, person here in the Seattle scene, as far as his advocacy goes in his capacity as president of the police union. I think a lot of people are upset right now because he's kind of both siding, so to speak, the violence that happened last week in the Capitol, pinning blame on far-right extremists, but also kind of shifting unsubstantiated blame towards far-left agitators, which there's been no indication to my knowledge that there's evidence that this was participated in by anyone on that side of the political spectrum. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, if, that outrage over how someone's handled this, how that manifests, and if it turns into any kind of, action to actually remove him from his position. I don't know. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Justin Carter, Capitol Hill has a long history with Mike Solon. I mean, if it wasn't long before this summer, before June, it's definitely been long from June since, man. What are some of your thoughts here on one, the calls for Solon to resign, and two, his statement today is basically like, hey, look, man, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's become clear that he seeks opportunities for, political dialogue, media opportunities. You start to ask, what the president of a police union actually does. It's right now it seems to be making inflammatory points in the media, and this is a great opportunity for him. Clearly, I guess what I'm curious to see is what consequences might be for the union to keep somebody like Solon in that seat. Would this actually cause pain in the negotiation process for the union? Would this be a person that the city won't work with? Those are the things that I think would really be where the rubber meets the road, and would end the hashtags and the memes and his take on leadership. But right now, there's no indication of that. Right now, it is political saber rattling from both sides.
Mike Davis, South Seattle Emerald's done a lot of reporting on Mike Solon, and I mean, what's your take over there? Again, with basically everybody in the city, I mean, these elected officials and appointed officials asking him to resign.
I think that they have merit to ask him to resign. I think that his statements were really inflammatory. I think that it especially hits home in Seattle, where over the summer, it wasn't this both sides thing. It was really explicit about the rioters and, how heavy-handed the SPD was. And now, you got officers that were in DC, and instead of putting the focus on accountability and finding out who was where, what they did, were they on the clock, did they take SPD gear there, and all of these other questions of implications, the idea is to retweet unfounded claims and to take this ridiculous stance. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, he's dug his heels in this whole time, so I don't really see him going without a fight. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out ultimately.
Yeah, I think that with Solon, I think that he has a lot of ambitions that are much bigger maybe than the Seattle Police Department or the Guild. I mean, he's very well versed in media. That's why I was real interested with this. It isn't like he's a novice with media. We see that Mike Solon goes on like a lot of national shows. I mean, they have a great use, Marion, of social media. They're on top of that. They produce videos. They produce all kinds of communication and everything else. But, it's real interesting that Solon probably could have not said anything and would have been okay. I don't think that anybody was forcing him to say anything or tweet anything or anything else. But, from that side, it's okay to just say when people are wrong. I think that Mike Solon might have missed a good opportunity with the general public to just be like, hey, what I saw there, these people were just wrong. And put it out there. But it was like, a shift over to Antifa, over to BLM. And the interesting thing is that the police and the FBI keep arresting people who aren't Antifa and who aren't BLM. They don't have arrest warrants out for or anything. So keeping it here local, wanted to bring up something that's occurred down there in Olympia. And we've been reporting this on the Morning Update show, people ran into the Capitol there in Washington, D.C. But, man, they breached the governor's mansion, at least the outer gate, and made it up to his door and everything else. And people who've been following these stories down in Olympia, but Olympia is dangerous. And somebody like Justin Carter might be happy to be like, man, I'm glad all the funk has moved from Capitol Hill down to the Capitol. But Olympia is dangerous. A few weeks ago, somebody was shot. You got all kinds of hand-to-hand combat down there. Here's a video of these guys who broke into the property there at the governor's mansion. Yeah, they're up in the crew. You hear them, whose house? Our house. Whose house? Yeah, it reminded me of being in the Bulldog gym, man. So down there in Olympia, now we see National Guard and some everything down there. Is there any reporting that the Times has on this that you could share with us, Melissa?
Sure. So Hellmann of the Seattle Times reported on this. He's based in Portland, so he's not too far from Olympia. So he reported on this when it happened, and so there were dozens of Trump supporters the same day as the incident that happened in the Capitol. It also happened in our Capitol here, so they were able to get past the gates. They were able to get up to the governor's mansion, as we saw in that video. They were chanting, and they also believe these unbased claims that Trump unfairly lost the election. So obviously, I think the governor was pretty scared about this, and there's increased security that is supposed to happen in the state capitol for this reason.
Yeah, man, it's crazy down there. I guess they put the governor in a safe house. Liz, what have you been hearing about what's been occurring down there in Olympia? And it's a real interesting, at least when we were following it real close, that you had some people who were just like, it's the Capitol, we should be able to get in. You had some people who were like COVID, protesting against COVID restrictions. You had some people who felt that the election was rigged. Yeah, some people who still feel like Colt won the election. I mean, it's all kinds of people down there in Olympia kind of protesting at the Capitol.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, what's going on the national level, you can see that playing out on the state level, local level, in other places. And, when I heard that protesters, Republican, right-wing protesters were outside of the governor's mansion, I wasn't surprised. In watching the attack on the Capitol, I figured it was only a matter of time before you see similar things unfolding on the state level in different places. And so, Governor Inslee is not well liked by a lot of people on the right because of the way he has approached the COVID-19 response. A lot of people on that side of the aisle have taken issue with his mandates regarding business restrictions and mask wearing. And so I think that was one issue at play. And then, people aren't happy that he has won a second term, not a second term, but another term as governor. And then, I think, people are just fired up right now after all of these politicians stoked the fire about the U.S. presidential election and, these unfounded claims that it was stolen. And so people really believe that, and they are acting on it.
Justin, any thoughts?
Well, I think one of the things that we see in these videos from Olympia is continuity between DC for sure, but also continuity with CHOP. Some of those characters are familiar to us from the protests, especially folks that were on the periphery and often trying to do some of the same activities that they're doing in Olympia now, provoke, instigate, cause issues, and I think that strategy seems to continue and will continue probably into at least through this really tense time into the inauguration.
Right. And let me bring this up here, and I'll start with you, Mike Davis. FBI, they said armed protests are being planned at all 50 state capitals from 16 January through at least 20 January, and the U.S. Capitol from 17 January to 20 January, FBI bulletin says. So now the FBI got the word out early. You think it's going to get funky in Olympia, Mike?
I hope not. But I think that what you just played is disturbing. I think that what played out at Governor Inslee's home is disturbing. And I think no matter what side you're on, I think going to people's homes, to their residence, is always a bad idea. I would never condone that. It's just a really dangerous situation that played out in front of Inslee's house, and he's there with his wife. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I sincerely hope that the FBI does take this seriously now. I hope that local police departments do take this more seriously now. And I hope that there's an actual stand to protect people and to not let this go any farther than it already has.
Yeah, I've always been somebody who's I've never been for going to somebody's house, you know. And when people were going to electeds' homes here, you know, I said I didn't agree with that. And I mean, it's interesting, you know, it's so polarizing though, and where people just can't say what's wrong. Wrong is just wrong. And, you know, for me, it was wrong to go to these electeds' houses, wrong to go to Governor Inslee's house. And it's not because it's Democrat, Republican, it's the governor's house. It breached the property. And, you know, one of the things I talked about, though, is that a lot of people, you know, people only chime up, I guess, when it hits their pressure point. Because you had some people real quiet when people were going to Juarez's house and going to Durkin's house. Then you had other people who made noise when protesters went there to Chief Best's house, and they were up there in Snohomish, and a lot of people were making noise. They went to Chief Best's house. It would be good to see people keep the same energy when they're talking about protesters going there to the governor's house. We're going to take a quick break real quick. We're going to recap on some of the Seattle protests, and then we're going to get people's thoughts moving forward. Maybe what we can expect here in the next week or two, if we make it through the next week or two and 2021 and beyond. You're watching Writer's Block.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us.
Back on this rap ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own. Tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers, and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media.
All right, welcome back to the Writer's Block. And man, do I have an esteemed group right here of journalistic professionals. Justin Carter, CapitolHillSeattle.com. We got Liz Brazile, KUOW. We got Melissa Hellmann of the Seattle Times, and Mike Davis. Man, all them like, boy, what I wouldn't do to just get a few of them dreads, man. We can't trade. I bet I'll give you the studio. I'll give you everything if I get them locks. Mike Davis of the South Seattle Emerald. And we, you know, it's hard to put what we saw this summer, all as journalists who saw the protests, either very up close or from a distance or somewhere in between, of some of the things that we saw here in the Seattle protest. But just want to kind of get people's thoughts. You know, this is a good opportunity when we're talking about such a big story to also come back here into Seattle of what we witnessed here. Justin Carter, I'd like to start with you. We have something that this is just a headline. This was on the 150th day. I think they're at 190 right now of some people one way or another who are still out there in the streets. This was October 27th, 2020. Seattle marks 150 days of protest with March from Capitol Hill. Man, Seattle protests. Tell us about it. Some of your reporting, your covering of it.
Well, that was an important story for me, for one, because it was one of the first times I actually got to sit back and think about the timeline. The months from the end of May through the summer and into the fall were pretty chaotic. Difficult to remember the details. How long had it been since the National Guard had been called out to my neighborhood? How long had the police held this block and then the next? And going through that story back in October was useful as far as establishing the timeline and remembering things like, well, I know the National Guard was there almost in the beginning, and seeing those pictures, especially from the beginning, it's shocking how quickly that battleground formed and how serious those aspects it took on became so rapidly, and it really became, in a sense, a front line in the neighborhood. It's a situation that the neighborhood is still recovering, the city is still recovering, and I think the country is still recovering from. It was shocking. There's some progress from it, but it's still, there's a lot of work to be done to kind of finish the work that started there.
Right. Liz Brazile, KUOW did a lot of reporting, like in all kinds of different manners over there during the protest. What are some of your takeaways on some of the reporting or the stories or things that stood out to you about the Seattle protests?
Yeah, it all seems so long ago, but it really wasn't. But I would say, some of my biggest takeaways were just I don't think when the protest started, that anybody, at least not in my newsroom, knew immediately that they would be ongoing for so long. So I think the protest really had if I could just talk about the impact on our newsroom, there was a big kind of reckoning that I think happened across the board in different newsrooms around the country. But I can say that at KUOW, there were just so many thoughtful conversations that resulted from the coverage of the protests, and we saw a lot of shifts in just like how we frame the narrative of protests against police violence and against racism. And I think that my biggest takeaway as a journalist was just how we think about our roles as journalists, and the power that we have as far as just like reflecting back to society what is happening, and that words are powerful, words mean things, and based on how you shape those narratives, you can really either do a lot of harm or you can really provide some important coverage that people really need to see. And so, with covering the protests, I think there was a lot of fumbling around in newsrooms around the country with trying to figure out the right approach for covering them, because what I think of going back to the first weekend of protests in Seattle was, you had peaceful protests occurring on one end of things, and then you also had riots that broke out and looting that happened. And so trying to figure out, how do we cover that two things can happen at the same time, that are, connected insofar as, they're happening simultaneously, but really making that distinction. And I think that's also something that's being reckoned with right now, with the Capitol riots, is towing that line of, when people are actually, exercising their First Amendment rights peacefully versus just causing chaos and violence and destruction.
I'm sorry. You bring up something interesting. The way that you just position that, and we'll go to Melissa next. But the way you position it is because it was a struggle early on. People, when especially the national media, when they came in, and I was talking to the national media, and the narrative was peaceful protests just turned violent into a riot in downtown Seattle. And consistently, whether it was ABC News Nightline or CNN, all these people I talked to, I was like, no, that's actually not what happened. There was actually a group of protesters, actually the black preachers and all these things, they held their protest right there in Westlake Park. It started peacefully, it ended peacefully, and it ended before curfew. And even as cars were on fire and flashbangs and tear gas and everything, that group that came there to Westlake Park assembled peacefully and left peacefully. But the larger narrative was just, and that's why I had to break it down to people. The larger narrative was just like, oh man, something turned peaceful and it went into chaos. And you're right, there's these nuances in there. It's like, okay, well, man, how do we tell these stories are actually happening simultaneously? Because it's real easy for it to just get washed into, well, it just turned violent all of a sudden. There was a group of people there who definitely, they all left right on time, right out peacefully out of Westlake. Melissa, how did the covering the protests I'll ask you a few different questions because I know it's a different perspective there. Either some of the things about the protests that stuck out to you as things that you covered, or, Liz brought up something interesting there, talked about how covering the protests impacted the newsroom there at KUOW.
Yeah, I think for me, some of my biggest takeaways. So I've been covering social justice in Seattle for about 4.5 years now, and I saw a lot of people who I'd never seen before at these protests, emergence leaders. So that was something that was really interesting for me. That it seemed like this created a space for young leaders to really be able to carve their voice in the racial justice movement here in Seattle. In a way that they might not have felt comfortable with before. And we saw some more established leaders take a step back to give these younger people a chance to sort of emerge. So that was something that was interesting for me. And in terms of the narrative, that Liz was mentioning, I think that it made us, at least for me, it made me have even more of a critical eye towards people who are so-called experts or officials, because we found during the summer, for instance, when the police was parroting this false narrative that protesters were embezzling business owners. We saw that repeated, and so I think that made reporters everywhere just take a step back and to just remember that you can't take everything that the police says. You can't just take their word for it. You have to investigate everything that everyone says to you. You can't give more credence to the police than you necessarily would an activist. And I for me it also. I think that it sort of felt validating because I do cover activism so much, seeing that a lot of people who maybe wouldn't be considered experts were now given that title.
Right, and what was interesting before I get to you, Mike Davis, is that's a big problem that some of the people here in this social justice movement in Seattle, protesters that they have with a lot of the larger media in the city, is that early on in these protests, some of the larger media outlets were just basically reprinting or going with whatever the Seattle Police Department said. And I think that the pink umbrella June 1st probably it says it all. The Seattle Police Department had put out a release saying that protesters had initiated this riot, and then we see the video of the actual flashpoint, which was a little bit different. And there was quite a few times. I remember there was a release that came out that said that the Seattle Police Department was just reducing their footprint at the East Precinct. And we were there. Remember that, Bobby? We were literally right there on June 8th. And we saw people moving all kinds of stuff out, moving trucks and this and that, and everything is getting boarded up. There's the fencing going on. But the police said that they were reducing their footprint, and everybody kind of ran with that. And I remember I was tweeting out about it, and And people were kind of knocking me down and saying it was fake news. Other media were saying it was fake news because the SPD said that they weren't going anywhere. And I remember we had to go on a live stream and be like, no, like really, here's the moving trucks, here's this and that, everything else. And so I think what we saw this summer around one of the things that we learned there, one of the things we saw, or either what a lot of media is doing, is kind of asking more questions when they get these releases. Mike Davis, the South Seattle Emerald, you guys covered the protests a lot down there. I remember we were in a fortunate enough position to loan out quite a bit of protective gear to Emerald staff. People knew to come over to Converge to come get a gas mask and some goggles and protective gear. What were some of your takeaways from the protest this summer? And also a good question for you: how did that impact the Emerald? You guys have quite a lot of writers out there working for the Emerald that actually cover these stories.
I think it allowed us to cover it from a lot of different angles, I would say. Some of the things that I personally covered was like the Black Education Now rally, where like the youth got together and then they did their rally and their march, and the kids march that happened at Garfield. And I really think that for me personally, that leads to my biggest takeaway being the youth, and watching the youth really become activated and really immerse themselves in the movement and actually be able to take leadership roles and really step out and speak. I talk a lot about my 7-year-old when I'm on this platform, and I remember taking her with me to the youth march that was at Garfield, and just, she was just so taken hearing the speakers and asking so many questions about what they're saying and what it means, and then doing the march. And I mean, and even like high schoolers, I do like a lot of high school sports coaching, and man, I was getting asked so many questions by the youth that I've never been asked before. So they're really like taking it in and seeing the world that they're living in for what it is, but also realizing that they also have the power to make change, and seeing the youth in that light, it was just so powerful for me. That was definitely one of my biggest takeaways.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think for me, well, there's a lot of unanswered questions. What's interesting, just kind of on a side note, but a connected note, is that, man, we see the mayor on TV all the time. We see Chief Best. We see other news stations have done all these in-depth investigative reports. Another news station actually talked to the FBI, but no one can tell us who ordered the East Precinct be evacuated. And also, I bring that up, though, too, is because, there really is this big national narrative that, like, protesters took the precinct. I mean, that precinct, the SPD came out every single day and protected that East Precinct. I know, Justin, you was right there next to me on that front line over there, man, and really kind of by all means, they protected that Western barricade. And the Seattle Police Department, for reasons best known to them and has never been explained to the public, they decided to abandon their precinct. Like, nobody forced them out, nobody whatever. The Seattle Police Department, and no one still can tell us why. And that set off such a chain of events. And I remember even speaking, so I've asked Chief Best, I've asked the mayor, who did what, and no one can give us a clear answer. Anyways, that's probably a whole nother show in itself. But I think some of the biggest takeaways from me was that, like, one, man, just the absence. Like, and I speak that like from a Black community sense, is that so many people were just kind of waiting. They were waiting, and being there on that Western barricade, you talk to these protesters up there, 90+% of them white, they were just waiting for these Black leaders to arrive, and maybe the established ones or whatever, and people were waiting for people to come there to the front line and literally, kind of join in, give instruction, whatever. They never came. But by them not coming, though, then what I think what Liz talked about is you got a whole nother group, and also what Mike talked about, you got a whole nother group of these younger leaders now really trial by fire because they were just out there in the Seattle protest. And it's still mind-boggling to me that, so many people were just waiting, people that at least me as community member just expected different voices to be there. seasoned voices, older voices, and we didn't really see a lot of that. And I think another takeaway for me is just how many people were not willing to put themselves in harm's way, and not physical harm, but just even, it could have been political harm. It could have been, what people just sat on the sideline. And of course, the tragic loss of life there. And I'll take a moment to say their names: Antonio Mays Jr. there up at the CHOP, and Lorenzo Anderson Jr. and also Summer Taylor. So some of the takeaways here. We're getting up on the top of the hour, so we'll go back around the horn here, and we'll take it back to kind of the bigger pictures of things. I know Justin Carter always says that he's not a prognosticator, and he can barely tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone 2 weeks from now. But as we go into this inauguration, we're going to start with you, Justin. We'll see how far in the future you can think on this, man. What do you see next? What do you see really next for our country and for our city? Do you think that we continue more down a divided path, or do you think that somehow, some way, we find a way forward?
I'm a big believer in momentum, that, tomorrow looks a lot like today. Right now, that probably sounds like bad news. But I do think that there's been some progress. I think for my own personal self, when I was reluctant to cover CHOP. It was a Black Lives Matter protest. It was in my neighborhood, but I did not, in the beginning, adopt it as my story. And eventually, as you know, I did. In some ways, I had to. And so maybe that's what I hope we see, is that more people have to adopt these stories now and make it their own and figure out how to be part of it, the way, a neighborhood blog did. So maybe that's an example, a small little piece of the puzzle.
Right. Liz?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen either, but, I know that the Biden administration has said it's super focused on, getting vaccines distributed as quickly as possible. And so I think we're going to see a shift in kind of the, political interest kind of in that regard. I don't know. News cycles are so crazy these days. There's no telling how long anything is going to have anyone's attention in this day and age. But I think that, moving forward, as far as just like the political just kind of break that's happened, I don't know what it's going to look like to get on even ground across the aisle with people. But, I'm hoping that we can find a path forward that, that doesn't just, have us falling back into the same old patterns, because, we went through so much last year. I think everybody's just ready to move forward.
I agree. Melissa?
Yeah, I think that the next couple of weeks, I guess only the next week at this point, I think it's going to be an intense week. There's calls to secure the capitals in all 50 states, and we saw that here at the Capitol when the legislature was in session yesterday. So I think that there's maybe cause for concern because people are desperate. They've been out of work for a long time. People are dying because of COVID. Our rates are just continuing to increase. Our COVID-19 rates are continuing to increase. So I don't know. I would like to be hopeful, but right now it just feels like 2020 all over again.
Man, what a lead into you, Mike Davis. 2020 all over again.
That's usually my stance around here. I think these next few weeks will be big. I think that as we formally make the transition to the Biden administration, I hope that it can happen as peacefully as possible moving forward. But I mean, I think people are upset, and I think that there's 75 million Americans that, for one reason or another, feel cheated. and they're upset right now. So I don't really know how much hope I have for bringing us together. I just, at some point, we got to be able to move on. If the Biden administration is really willing to address old wounds to help heal and move forward, that would be great. I'm not very optimistic that that will happen, but I do think that the news cycle moves fast. So hopefully we can naturally get past this and one day get back to our normal lives.
Yeah, but I think that's probably also one thing that does happen, and that's continued to happen, is like the news cycle has moved so fast that a lot of these issues are just never dealt with. It's just on it's on to the next thing. And on the morning update show, we've been talking about this. Even on your show, Clapback Culture, Mike, we've been talking about since the election, been telling people like, yo, we got to talk to your neighbors. Yes. Because like, even if you look at our state, man, if you break it out into red, blue, yeah, this is a population center that's over there, but a lot of our neighbors in this state, our state is very divided as well, and that's what we see, just like our country is. And I mean, for me, I'm always like, yo, we don't have to agree, but let's make an effort to try to understand. And I think that we'd all be foolish as a country to say like, okay, well, hey, Biden is elected and now it's peace and kumbaya and everything else, especially when some of these issues that we're facing in our country are centuries old. And my mama used to always say, you can legislate laws, but you can't legislate people's heart. You can't legislate people's heart condition. They're going to feel the way that they're going to end up feeling, about things. But for me, if I was going to say for the next few weeks, unfortunately, I think it's going to get kind of funky, hoping for the best, of course. And we've all just seen way too much and been through way too much. But I really think that a lot of people are very committed to their ideas and their beliefs. And so we definitely got an uphill challenge, not only with social issues there in America, but don't forget this COVID vaccine and getting that out too. We're up against it. I want to thank our very esteemed guests for joining us here on this edition of Writer's Block. Justin Carter, Capitol Hill, Seattle.com. Liz Brazile, KUOW Public Radio. Melissa Hellmann from the Seattle Times. Mike Davis from the South Seattle Emerald. And also in our previous hour, we had Jessie from Converge Media and King County Councilmember Girmay Zahilay. Want to remind everybody this episode of Writer's Block will be available on our podcast platform. You can go to whereweconverge.com podcast. When will that be up there, Bobby? So tomorrow, this is an episode you can listen across any of your favorite places where you get your podcast. Just put in Converge Media. Mike Davis, you're back with us on Thursday, 7:00 for Clapback Culture with Jessie. And we're back tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for the morning update show. Again, let me look in here to the camera. I really want to thank all you guys for taking the time to join us tonight and have this discussion. And I think that we all should probably get together more often.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us, Omari.